Good morning, everyone. I want to thank everybody for deciding to start their day in this manner and joining us on a panel to discuss EPA water priorities for 2013. Not only are we pleased to have this high number of attendants with us, but we're also pleased to put together a great panel that will certainly enlighten everybody on what some of the priorities are for the coming year and how we anticipate those will impact not only us as water utilities, but the communities in which we represent as well. With that being said, I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce our panel. Going from my left, we have Ann Codrington, who is the Director of the Drinking Water Protection Division with EPA. We have Jim Taft, who is the Executive Director of ASWA. And we have Mike Paik, who is the Executive Director of the Groundwater Protection Council. And I'd just like to also take the opportunity to thank Mike for co-locating their conference with us this week. It's certainly been a benefit to both of us. Moving on to his left, we have Mike Finn, an environmental engineer with US EPA. And then finally, Mike Keegan with Rural Water, who's no stranger to any of you in this room. And with that being said, we're going to kick things off with remarks from Ann Codrington. And then what we would like to do at that point is open it up for questions and comments from the audience that will be fielded by our panel. So, Ann, thank you for joining us, and the podium's yours.
Good morning, everyone. It's hard to see out there, but it's so bright. I'm so happy to be here and to see all of you here this morning. I am the Director of the Drinking Water Protection Division, and I am very happy to be able to talk to two groups here about the importance of drinking water and protecting it as a source so that we can make sure that we provide for high-quality water in the future. So what I was asked to talk about was priorities, and as you all can imagine, there are a number of very important priorities that I could talk about, but I wanted to really focus on just a couple of key things. One that I think is very important to be talking to this group about is small systems and sustainability of small drinking water systems, because they really are the backbone for this country in providing clean, healthy water. I also want to talk about source water protection, and that's because if you can protect a drinking water source in the beginning, you can make sure that you don't have to provide treatment in the end. And I want to just emphasize some of the activities that we're doing in that area in 2013 and beyond. And then I wanted to talk about hydraulic fracturing for a little bit, because it is the thing that I think many of us have heard about, either in the media or in other areas, and it's just something that takes a lot of time and a lot of attention and is very important to the nation. And so I wanted to touch on some of the activities that we are undertaking at the agency, and that's something that I think you all are probably going to see in one way or another affect you. So small drinking water system sustainability is, as I said, very important for safe, reliable, and sustainable water quality in the future. It's the backbone of the community. We understand that there are a number of challenges to small drinking water systems. Those include the infrastructure and its age and the quality and the ability of the pumps and the pipes to continue to provide water. Other challenges include making sure that there is a high quality source of water available now and in the future. There are also issues with respect to retirements. We know that there are a number of them coming, and we need to be able to backfill so that there are people who can manage the drinking water systems. We also want to make sure that we are using declining resources as efficiently and effectively as possible. And we also want to make sure that small systems can comply with the regulatory requirements. We know that's a challenge, and we are really appreciative of all of the work of the National Rural Water Association and other states' associations in trying to make sure that the regulations that are developed are as simple and as useful as possible. So I talked a minute ago or a second ago about the regulations, and I know that the current regulations are difficult to implement. And on top of that, there is the set of new regulations that may be coming down the pike. We have, for example, the long-term revisions to the lead and copper rule waiting at the Office of Management and Budget for review. We know that small systems are particularly interested in the revised total coliform rule, and we know that there's a lot of interest in the work that we're doing on carcinogenic VOCs. And so with these new rules, there will be new challenges. And so we realize that we need to step up and provide assistance to make sure that we can meet those challenges. And so we're working very closely on developing training and providing other materials to support the revised total coliform rule, and I'm going to talk for a moment about some of the activities that we're doing to make sure that we can address those challenges as they come. So when I say we're trying to address the challenges, I mean that we want to ensure that the workforce out there that supports drinking water systems across the country is knowledgeable, and that we provide training wherever appropriate. We want to make sure that all systems, including small systems, are planning and making sure that they can manage for the challenges, and if that means partnering, then that's what should happen as appropriate. We want to make sure that systems are looking at the revenues and making sure that the service that's being provided is accounted for, and that the cost of the service is accounted for in the rates. We want to make sure that the resources, electricity, source water, the chemicals used are being managed properly, and we want to make sure that the customers are aware of the quality of the water, and the decision makers are aware of what it means to provide for a sustainable system. And so all of those components are wrapped up into some of the tools and the trainings that we are either developing or have already developed and are making available. So we know that small systems are an important aspect of what we do every day at the agency, because it is one of the agency's 5 priority goals. And if there are only 5 for the entire agency, you know drinking water and small systems is very critical. And so the agency is committed to making sure that we are focusing on strengthening the technical, managerial, and financial capacity of small systems. And the President's budget is I think, a good sign of that, and I'll talk a little bit about the technical assistance grants that we've awarded in a minute. And we're also working very closely with states to improve the small system capability and to make sure that through the optimization program, small systems can do what they need to do to maximize, to make more efficient their operations, and that they've got the capacity that they need to move forward. So asset management is key to small system sustainability. One of the things that we are doing at the agency with the help of a number of different folks is training. These can be webinars, and sometimes they're conference calls. But right now, we're conducting asset management training so that people understand or can learn more about that if they need to. There is also a work group that is composed of both states and EPA working on asset management, and what their goal is to provide best management practices for all to use once they're done with their deliberations. In addition, we have a great tool called Checkup Program for Small Systems, and that tool, it provides a self-paced set of training modules so that individuals can go on and work at their own pace to learn about how to make sure that there is financial and managerial capacity. And we are also looking at some specific cases out there so that we can write them up and provide more information to you all about how best to access the tool, how best to ensure financial and managerial capacity. So I talked a little bit about the need to make sure that the resources are being used wisely, because they are a large source of the cost of running a system. And so we've worked very hard to develop an energy use assessment tool that allows the user to conduct sort of an assessment of the entire facility to figure out where the equipment is in terms of its useful life, what the energy use is, and what the costs are associated with that. We are developing a new version that will work with Windows 2010, and we're also doing webinars to promote the tool. So be on the lookout on the website for the next webinar so that you can learn more about those tools. In addition, we've developed a sustainability handbook in conjunction with the Office of Wastewater Management. And this really provides a tool for how to enhance the planning process. And we're hopeful that people can use that tool and do a good job of planning so that we can prepare ourselves for the needs of the future. Water system partnerships is something that we know is very critical to making sure that there is long-term sustainability. It allows for systems to leverage shared resources, to share in terms of chemicals if necessary, to share in terms of the technical support that may be needed to operate a system. It's such an important thing for us that we are trying to make more tools available to talk about this concept and to have a greater understanding of this concept. One of the things that we have done is to include the idea of partnerships with water systems in the discussions that we're having with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And we have collaborated with USDA on 3 webinars so that we can further provide information on water system partnerships. So I mentioned a while ago that technical assistance grants were awarded. I think that I'm very happy to know that Congress believes that small system sustainability is so important that it would allocate $15 million for that purpose. And so Congress essentially directed EPA to run a competition to award $15 million for the purpose of small system training and technical assistance. We went through that process over the course of the last 9 or so months, almost a year, and are happy to announce the winners of those awards. We had a webinar where we talked about what specifically would be done under each of the awards. I won't read you everything that's on this slide, but you can see who the winners were and what their focus is, and we're just very happy to know that they'll be starting. Actually, they should have already started. September is pretty much the time frame. It's a 1-year award for each of the awardees that runs from September to September. So it's not clear yet whether there'll be another appropriation of this kind next year, but there's a chance, and we'd like to make sure that in the coming year, if that money is awarded, that it is awarded in a way that allows for small systems to benefit through the technical assistance and training that's being provided. Federal partnerships is another way that we've been working to increase the ability of small systems to continue in a sustainable way. We've worked very hard with USDA, with the Department of Veterans Affairs to come up with ways to either provide for assistance and workers, or to get the message out to leverage funds. We also are really grateful that there are a number of technical assistance providers out there that have partnered along with the federal government in some of these efforts, and you can see some of those there on the slide. But we are extraordinarily happy to know that these partnerships are working, and we look forward to doing more of them in the coming year. So I want to move now to source water protection. And I have always believed that source water protection is very much a foundational component of the drinking water program. And it's because it's a way of securing drinking water sources for the future. We have been working for some time now with the National FFA. And the National FFA, if you're not aware, is a great group that is focused on education for the future agricultural leaders. And it develops curriculum, and it gets those leaders together and teaches them about leadership and about how to be successful in agricultural careers. We've worked with the National FFA to develop curriculum that focuses on source water protection. And I'm happy to say that the FFA has completed lessons in 20 different areas, and they're all tied to the science education standards that grades 9 through 12 have to undergo. And in these lessons, there is an emphasis on source water protection, understanding the role of local governments and land decisions, and how the land decision practices can affect drinking water quality, focuses on conservation practices that can be done in the field by the students themselves. And we just think it's a great tool to not only build for the future the security of our drinking water sources, but also to actually get students talking to their parents about what they might be able to do today. You can find those lesson plans online at the FFA website. The link is there. Another thing that I wanted to mention related to source water protection is that we've been working internally with data and with tools that we think can put information about source water quality in the hands of local communities. And in addition, we want to make sure that where state governments or federal entities are looking out for drinking water quality, they can actually focus on source water protection areas. And so there is a tool, OTIS is what we call it, but it stands for Online Tracking Information System, that has been updated to allow for a more focused emphasis on source water protection areas when an inspector goes in and wants to identify which facilities to inspect. And so we really think that this is a good tool for making sure that we have identified the facilities within source water protection areas where we might want to focus some attention. The Source Water Collaborative has been integral to source water protection for a number of years now, and they continue to do great work. One of the things that has been happening recently is an emphasis on working with agricultural leaders, with the USDA, with the conservation districts out in communities to provide information about source water protection. And the collaborative is developing a tool that consists of online tips for working with state conservation districts, and that should be available soon. And you can see here on the slide that there are going to be a lot of good tips in this tool. It'll include information on identifying common ground opportunities, and also where the contexts are in the states or in the districts that might need to be included. This gives you a sense of what that page will look like. The plan is to launch it sometime this fall. It will be available at the collaborative's website, and you can see that link there below. And we're really looking forward to the use of that tool. One of the things that the Source Water Collaborative has been doing is trying to get the word out about the value of collaboration at the local level. And so the hope is that over time, smaller collaboratives at the local level will be established doing great work to protect source waters, to protect watersheds that provide for drinking water sources. We were really happy to hear that the work of the Salmon Falls Collaborative was recognized and given what's called a U.S. Water Prize for 2012. And there's been a lot of great work that's been done out there, and we know that all of them deserve this prize, but we are just so happy that the work of this particular group has been recognized, and just want to thank all of the people involved at the state level, at the community level, and at EPA Region 1 for getting this to take place. So I mentioned I wanted to talk about hydraulic fracturing. And while hydraulic fracturing is not the only thing that we're working on, it is one of those things that takes up a sufficient time and attention that it's worth talking about here. The reason why it's something that's taking up time and attention is because people are learning about it in their communities where perhaps oil and gas activities have not taken place. And so we are addressing oil and gas exploration in new locations. Sometimes they are very different than the traditional locations. Sometimes weather patterns are different. Sometimes there are people in closer proximity, and so that generates a lot of interest. In addition to the chemicals that may be used in the oil and gas extraction process related to hydraulic fracturing itself, we are hearing that there are concerns about what might be in the formations that might be mobilized in either the water that's produced or the water that stays underground. So we are very interested in understanding this as well, and recognize the seriousness with which people come to us with their concerns. In addition, one of the concerns that has been raised more recently is water use, and how do we allocate water resources in a time of drought? How do we allocate water resources in a time of growing populations in certain areas, or where there's a demand from a number of different entities, a number of different uses? And when I say we, I mean the royal we. I don't mean EPA, but I mean that we as a nation are going to have to come together and find a way to address the needs holistically. And so recognizing that there are these needs, and that natural gas is a very critical component of our energy security, we want to make sure that when it's produced, it is done in a way that protects drinking water sources, because we know that once a drinking water source is gone, it's very difficult to replace it. So there are a number of things going on in the Office of Water. Some of them are under the Clean Water Act, others are under the Safe Drinking Water Act. I mentioned a few here. I'll talk more about the Safe Drinking Water Act activities in the next slides. So one of the things that my office is working on is a guidance document related to how to permit hydraulic fracturing when diesel fuels are being used. And some people ask, well, why are we working on this? Well, the reason is because in 2005, Congress changed the Safe Drinking Water Act to exclude all hydraulic fracturing from the definition of underground injection. But they left one small part of hydraulic fracturing within that definition of underground injection, and that part is where diesel fuels are being used. And that's in part because EPA identified diesel fuels as a concern when it did its study in 2004 on coal bed methane hydraulic fracturing. And so Congress picked up on that and left that in under the jurisdiction of the Safe Drinking Water Act Underground Injection Control Program. So we have heard from states that people need more assistance in how to permit these kinds of activities, and so we developed a draft guidance to provide assistance. The guidance is directed at EPA permit writers, so that would mean where EPA is the permitting authority, it would rely on the guidance. The guidance is in draft form now. We're working on a final form. We received thousands of comments. I think 97,000 was the last count. Many of them came from concerned citizens, and the comments ranged from things like, we don't need a guidance because this isn't a concern, to concerns about why not just ban diesel fuels in hydraulic fracturing. So we're looking at all of those comments, and we're working to develop the final guidance for this. Again, it's directed at EPA permit writers, and our hope is to have it done sometime, at this point with the number of comments, sometime early next year. The other thing that's going on of importance, and I think it's worth everyone's paying attention to, is a study of hydraulic fracturing. I think that over the last 2 years, I've heard about many studies that have been authorized because people are very interested in understanding just what the impacts are. We've spent a lot of time listening to some concerns. We've also spent a lot of time listening to others who say, well, there isn't a need for concern. So in 2010, Congress asked EPA to begin a study on the effects of hydraulic fracturing on drinking water, and to try to understand better whether there is an impact that could affect the quality. Part of that study has been ongoing over the last 1.5 years. We're at a point now where we're going to be releasing a status report of where we are with the study. But we're also at a very important point where we want to make sure that people understand what the components of the study are, what is happening with all of those pieces, and where might we need additional information. And so EPA has begun another process to engage stakeholders. If you were aware, when we first started the study in 2010, went around the country, did a number of stakeholder meetings, and talked to people in 4 different regional areas to get a better sense of what people around the country wanted to see in the study. Well, now what we'd like to do is to talk again with stakeholders to understand in more detail, now that we've got the components figured out, what issues they think that we ought to be addressing that we may not be addressing, where are there technological or information gaps that could be filled, and what's the state of the science. We also want to provide the opportunity to share information about what we're doing through this effort. And so what the agency has done is held a series of conference calls with various groups, including tribes, including utility associations, state associations, and others to let them know that we're starting this new process of engagement, that we would like to get nominees, people with technical abilities that might be helpful in looking at the specific elements of the study. And so I know that a number of folks on this panel have participated in those calls, and that we're hopeful in getting a good group of people to help us in this next process of stakeholder engagement. In addition, we will continue to work with the Science Advisory Board, which is an independent board set up by the EPA that goes through a very rigorous process of review to make sure that there are no conflicts of interest to look at the study, but our hope is to have not only the SAB group, but this new stakeholder group working as well. As far as the timing, we are expecting to have some roundtable discussions in November. I think the dates are the 14th, the 15th, and the 16th in Washington, D.C. And then we will move into more specific workshops in the spring time frame. We are also going to be releasing a progress report in December, and then continue with stakeholder engagement and essay review into next year. So the final report is expected to come out in 2014, and our hope is that we will have gathered all the information that we've needed on what's going on out in the field in terms of case studies and what we've learned as far as water management, well construction, waste disposal, and other aspects to provide good information for both the agency and for those of you out there who are interested. So that concludes my remarks, and I think I will call it done and sit back down, and then I think we'll go into the panel questions and discussion.
Thank you, Ann. With our panel up here, I'd just like to offer them the opportunity first if there were any brief comments that they would like to make before we open it up to questions from both the audience, and we did have a couple of questions submitted here prior to, so if anybody on the panel have any comments they'd like to. Mike?
David, not so much a comment, but just a thank you to the National Rural Water Association and the Board of Directors. We've had a number of really terrific meetings here in the last 3 days, and we're very pleased with the interaction between the two organizations. I have to say that I have lunch with Sam Wade of Rural Water about every month or so, and he's been asking us to do this for a number of years, and finally everything clicked, and we appreciate Sam's persistence and are really pleased with the outcome of the meeting and the interaction between the two groups. So I thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely, you're very welcome, Mike. Thank you for joining us. throughout Ann's remarks earlier, we did hear a lot on some of the regulatory actions that will be forthcoming and that the agency is working on. Also, some source water issues, a lot of the collaborative issues and partnerships that are being developed both at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. And that certainly opens up a lot of opportunities. And with that being said, I'd just like to ask our panel maybe what they see as some of the biggest challenges that our small rural water systems may be facing here in the next couple of years or so. Jim Taft, I won't put you on the spot, but what do you think about that?
It's a great question, David. Let me just take a moment just to explain who we are. I represent the state drinking water programs in the 50 states, the 5 territories, the Navajo Nation, and the District of Columbia. And so state drinking water programs are challenged by many of the same things, I think, that rural water facilities are. Probably way too much to do and not enough resources to do it. As we think about reaching out to and working with small rural water systems, I think probably our starting point is to think about setting priorities and working together to determine how best to use our limited resources. We can do that, I think, in a number of ways. I think probably the best way is on-the-ground knowledge based upon relationships and trust and ongoing work together so that we have an understanding of where we can best use our respective tools and partner with one another as we do work together. There are a couple of other ways that we set priorities. One is obviously enforcement and compliance considerations. For those of you that don't know, about a year and a half or so ago, the EPA's Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance came up with a new approach to rank ordering compliance issues. It's called the Enforcement Targeting Tool. And it's backed up by something called the Enforcement Response Policy. But essentially it boils down to looking at a whole facility and the types of violations and the duration of the violations. So if there is an acute violation that has been going on for some time, that would be a very serious matter that would get a higher score than perhaps another. So looking at the ETT list would be one way in which we would help set priorities and determine kind of where we needed to put our emphasis. Ann mentioned the area-wide optimization program. That's a program engaged in by about 25 states, and they use a number of technical criteria in ranking all of the facilities of their states in terms of the how they're doing and the types of issues that may need assistance. So I think once we sort of set priorities based upon a number of factors, and as I said, the best being kind of ongoing interactions and knowledge about facilities, I think we then need to determine what tools to use. Our basic approach there, I think, is to use a kind of an all-of-the-above approach. We think that we need to look at all of the tools in the toolbox at our disposal, probably starting first and foremost with money, which is of great interest to everybody. And our biggest asset or tool there, obviously, is the State Revolving Loan Fund. And as you know, there's a disadvantaged component to that. The majority of the projects that are done through the SRF are with and for small systems. We would like to make the SRF program into the future as strong as it can be, as efficient as it can be, reducing and hopefully streamlining what are called cross-cutter requirements, things that are imposed statutorily on the SRF program. For instance, coming out of the Recovery Act was the requirement that 10% of funding, actually at the time, 20% needed to go towards green infrastructure, which is something that we all sort of support conceptually, but at some point green projects start to compete with kind of public health considerations and those kinds of priorities. So we would like to see a little bit more of a kind of a nimble, leaner approach to the SRF. And so that's something that obviously requires ongoing interactions with Congress. Also, a fully funded SRF, I think, is something that we seek in terms of our ability to support small systems financially. We've been very fortunate that with the Recovery Act, there was $2 billion for the drinking water SRF. We've had record levels over the last couple of years, $1.4 billion, $1.3 billion, about $965 million this past year, and the President had asked for about $830 million for FY13, and so it's kind of going back down to the levels that it had been. We would like to make sure that it at least stays there, and hopefully maybe returns to closer to the levels of the last couple of years. So we think the SRF program is one of those key tools in the toolbox. Another one is all of the capacity development tools that we have, some of which Ann referred to, trying to assess the technical, managerial, and financial capacity of water systems and determine sort of what are the best tools that perhaps state staff can offer, that rural water technical assistance providers can offer, that other consultants and trainers can provide. And so there are a number of tools that help us in that diagnostic process. And mentioned, for example, the CUPS program, the checkup program for small systems, which is a great way to, in a very simple, straightforward approach, to assess the asset management capabilities of a small system. States have been engaged with EPA over the last couple of years in sharing best practices and things that have worked well around the country, trying to make those known and shareable and implementable. This is all part of an effort that we're calling re-energizing capacity development, sort of bringing to the table the things that have worked well and trying to make those widely known and widely used. At the moment, we're spending a lot of time on non-community water systems, which is one of the toughest nuts to crack. These would be rest stops and restaurants and gas stations that have their own water systems, for whom provision of water is not their principal business. So trying to work with those folks, I think, is going to be a challenge. And then I think just working in collaboration, again, with all of our partners, one of our main partners being National Rural Water Association and the state affiliates, whose work we value very, very highly. We have great working relationships, I think, around the country with the state affiliates, and so we would like to build on that and maximize our efforts and make them as effective as they can be. So that's kind of a long-winded response to a short question, but those are some of the ways I think that we see states being most effective in helping small systems, setting priorities effectively, using all of the tools in the toolbox strategically based on our knowledge of what's needed, and working in partnership.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else on the panel have any thoughts on that?
I'll be a little more specific than Ann was in terms of specifically where we think a lot of the challenges for small systems will be in the very near term with the rules, and where I know you folks can help in your efforts. Ann mentioned the revised total coliform rule. As most of you are probably aware, small systems have a really, really hard time with this, and it's usually not related to their water quality. It's related to forgetting to take a sample. It's related to a lot of other things that don't necessarily reflect water quality. So the changes in the rule, the good news is the changes in the rule will probably reduce the number of violations. The bad news is that there will be some expectations on the water system operators to take some actions, and that's where I think outreach, training, education, getting them ready for what's coming, because they are going to be expected to do things. It's not just take a sample, take it to the lab, get the results, turn it into the state. It's more, if you get a detection, you've got to go back and look at your system. You've got to be putting together information to help you and the state make some decisions. And I think that's where it's the kind of thing where things are going to change, and people are going to be expected to do some things they weren't doing before, and to help them through that, we can get them started right away. The other one I think is a big issue from a regulatory standpoint is the stage 2 disinfection byproducts issue, which is going to, at least for the community and the non-community systems, is going to be a bigger deal. They're going to have to start looking much closer at their system to avoid violations, and that's someplace where if you can encourage folks to go look at the data they've collected, think about what they can do in the future to help manage their system to reduce their DVP levels. That's someplace where we can maybe preemptively help folks avoid violations in the future. And last is not regulatory, but Ann kind of mentioned it. It's the water availability and declining water resources issue. The large utilities are really, really focused on this. I've been to meetings where they have entire departments within the agency just looking at changes to their water supply, in water quality, and in availability, and if they have to change water supplies, where would they go? And I don't have to tell you, that's not something that small systems are focused on, but it's something, for whatever reason, whatever the reasons for the changes, they will have to focus on in the future, and could get caught by surprise. And that's another area where I think we're going to work at it, and I think you folks can help in getting the small systems to at least acknowledge the issue and maybe start monitoring their sources, see how much is there, and their demands, and see how they can plan for the future, whatever that future may bring. So that's a few quick specifics.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I would like to open with a couple compliments to my co-panelists here in a moment, but Mike just mentioned the forthcoming, hopefully soon to be released, revised total coliform rule. And this final rule could be released any day. From our perspective, the sooner the better. And Mike just articulated what is in that bill, but I want to say it again, to let it absorb. And our benevolent moderator was the lead negotiator for the National Rural Water Association with EPA on recrafting this rule. And as Mike just said, this new rule will eliminate the violation, the MCL violation, for total coliforms. So you will no longer be required, what you had known as a violation of total coliform and had to go to public notice. That will be eliminated. You can clap if you want. It will be replaced with a self-assessment, but it will not be a violation, and you will not have to go to that public notice again. And I thought that was a great source of consternation across the country. And I did acknowledge David for being the lead negotiator for NRWA, and also thanks to EPA, who actually did agree and led the negotiation. I was going to open with compliments to my co-panelist, because from my perspective, I'm sitting next to two regulators and two people who represent regulators. And I think it's kind and generous and perhaps maybe even brave for you all to attend. And I want to acknowledge that. When I look at the conference, I think the ratio from regulators to regulated is at least 500 to 1. And it's an important part of this conference and our interaction with you that you come here and we have this dialogue, so thank you very much. Specifically, I'd like to compliment the EPA, Ann and Mike, for a proposal that just came out about a week ago. And it's a proposal to change or reinterpret, with the advent of new technologies, the distribution of consumer conference reports. Has anybody ever heard of a consumer conference report? Now, has anybody ever heard of publishing, copying, and mailing a consumer conference report? Well, what EPA has proposed, and this just proposed last week, is a potential to change that process where you have to publish, copy, and mail the consumer conference report and allow you to do it on the net through internet publishing. So I want to compliment the agency on that offer. We're looking forward to it. It's a very important idea that's been proposed. The agency is taking comments on this idea right now, up until October 11th. And from the announcement from the agency, they may be able to make a final decision by January of next year. Did you want to?
Sure. Thank you for the thank you.
I wasn't finished with the rest of my compliments, though, but go on.
I just wanted to make it clear that What we've done is to issue a draft interpretation. We believe that the current statute, the current regulations allow for electronic transmission of the CCR, and we wanted to provide clarity to that concept. So it's not a rule. It really is just an interpretation. But what we've done is gone through a process to solicit ideas for what the best approach is for doing, for electronically sending CCRs. And so that process continues as you know, we're still taking comments. There will be a meeting very soon, actually, to talk about some of the options that we've come up with based on what we've heard. So, yes. We hopefully will come to a decision at some point in the near future based on the discussions that we've been having.
I feel like I've left Jim and Mike Paik out of the...
And I'll just jump in, Mike, and say that we are supportive of that approach and concept as well. We think it really makes only good sense in the 21st century to be talking about electronic transmission of CCRs, with the option if a customer needs, for some reason, a mailed copy to so indicate, but by way of saving trees and saving resources and saving the time and efforts of folks at Water Systems, we think this is really the way to go, provided the EPA is able to make the legal finding that it does indeed support the tenets of the Safe Drinking Water Act.
Thank you, Jim. I want my compliment to Jim was, as Sam Wade has announced over the last couple weeks, he did a survey, and it looks like approximately $9.8 million are awarded from state primacy agencies to state rural water associations to provide technical assistance, source water, and training among the states. This is outside of the federal process. That's just from Jim's members within the State Drinking Water Association. That's almost $10 million a year from the SRF at the agency's discretion to be used to augment technical assistance in the state associations, and I don't think we can thank you enough for that partnership.
Our pleasure. It's a very good use of our funds.
Thank you. And to Mike Paik, a lot of Ann's comments were focused on hydraulic fracturing. And when you think of hydraulic fracturing, when you think about the controversy of hydraulic fracturing, what's always the contention? That it's going to contaminate drinking water supplies, groundwater supplies. Usually the biggest argument against it or concern over it. And Mike Paik's organization, which is similar to Jim's and its state officials, state government officials, the Groundwater Protection Council has been the lead organization in contributing sound science, credible science, and the necessary science to allow this debate to occur dispassionately with good influence policy, and we thank you for that, for providing that resource to everybody. I'm being told to hurry up here. So actually the answer to the question was, what do I see on the regulatory agenda? And I wrote down 4 things. Ann spoke and Mike spoke to 3 of them. The one maybe that needs to be amplified the most is the lead and copper rule. EPA is in the process of revising the lead and copper rule. Fine, yeah, sure. It's going to be revised sometime next year, and it's being open to comments now and will be when it's proposed. Some of the things that are being looked at in the new revision are retaining the monitoring aspect now, where you somehow have to get the water sample from people's houses. I don't see right now that that's being considered to be removed. Also on the table is the water district having to, at times, in certain unique circumstances for temporary periods of times, perhaps providing home treatment pitchers into households and servicing them. That's a concept that's being discussed. That's new. And also a concept that's being discussed is extending the responsibility that the water district has over the facilities they own to the facilities they control. That really has to deal with when you're required to replace lines. So those are only proposals, and they can come up in the question period. The total coliform rule, the next one, that could be finalized any day. I think maybe the biggest challenge from our perspective is nutrient policies. What are state nutrient policies under the Clean Water Act? How are they going to burden NIPDIS wastewater permit holders over the coming years, and the consumer conference support, which I think we went into. So that's my statement. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mike. Another issue that's been in the forefront has been the relationship of the water supply with the energy arena as well. And there's certainly been an agency at the forefront that has really been doing a lot of work and as we heard earlier, providing a lot of sound science and to the issue that's at hand. And probably never more than now is when a lot of our small systems are being faced with this very issue, because the energy markets have moved into our backyard, so to speak. And with that being said, I'd ask Mike Pake from the Groundwater Protection Council for a little input on how you see that evolving and the impact of energy issues on rural water.
If you take a look at the agenda that outlines what our conference is about, I want to start by saying something different, David. You'll see a lot of things on here that don't have anything to do with hydraulic fracturing and oil and gas production. And I want to make the point, just to begin, and then have a comment on energy, that the Groundwater Protection Council, I think the key to understanding who we are and how we function is the word protection. We, as others have pointed out, the people I work for are some of the same people that Jim Taft works for, people that regulate manage state programs, drinking water, and in our case, a larger focus on groundwater. People, I think of the person running the drinking water program in Ohio, and his title is Director of Groundwater and Drinking Water. So, but the protection part of groundwater protection is really a key, and we try to be very, very active in all things that affect groundwater, and something very important to this organization, obviously. So I wanted to make that point just at the beginning. Oil and gas production is something that, and underground injection and the disposal of the water produced from oil and gas has been something that we kind of cut our teeth on many, many years ago. And we've got, maybe because nobody else wants to do it, as a national association, the Groundwater Protection Council spends a lot of time focusing on underground injection, which is a prevention program, a pollution prevention program, not well understood. But hydraulic fracturing has really dominating the landscape right now, and is something any of you in oil and gas producing states are well aware of. And I like to point out, and I give a lot of talks on hydraulic fracturing and the state regulations, that I think it's important to reframe the concern about protecting groundwater and hydraulic fracturing. Hydraulic fracturing is a very small and short-timed event that happens typically thousands and thousands of feet underground. And as you've heard and we've said, there's not an instance of groundwater contamination, drinking water, groundwater contamination from that one act from hydraulic fracturing. It doesn't happen. And if it does, we'll be the first to line up and say something happened, and here's something that here's a consequence. But what does occur, and this affects all of you, what does occur is traditional oil and gas production has created and can create problems. And I like to say that any natural resource extractive activity can cause that. If you pick on Mother Nature, there's going to be a pushback and something's going to happen. But that's something that we've managed for 50, 75, and 80 years. And one of the things that we've done recently, and I'm sure you're all going to be looking at it the minute I get done saying it, is we developed a site for chemical disclosure called fracfocus.org. And I think that's something that might be helpful for you all. And I've given a couple of talks to some of the state associations, state component parts of National Rural Water, and encourage the people that are out there on the front lines and have concerns about groundwater contamination, any kind of problems with oil and gas production, to go to Frac Focus and take a look at what's there, what chemicals are being used in hydraulic fracturing. And there's a lot of other information there as well about groundwater flow and that sort of thing, what to test your well for. We've got a new brochure out that many of you might find useful, and it's produced jointly by the National Groundwater Association, who are the water well drillers, and GWPC, and it's for the landowner or maybe the small public water supply, and it attempts to answer questions about pre-drilling or post-drilling and protecting your public water supply. And then it directs you to resources that you can use to help you get more on top of that. So I'd encourage you to, I guess, go to our website and find that, and it's something we'll be distributing across the country to help small systems deal with this. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Well, you did. Well, thank you, Mike. And with that being said, I would like to open this up to the audience for any questions that you may have as well. I'll say it's a little difficult for us to see all of you out there, but if you do have a question, Bill O'Connell's in the center of the room and has the microphone, and just get his attention to move forward.
Larry McElroy, Tennessee. Mike, this question is for you and for the EPA. You mentioned the possibility of having installed some point-of-use filters with new lead and copper rule. I would really encourage EPA to go away from that method. In the area that I used to work in, I don't know of anything that created more problems than point-of-use filters and the misinformation that was put out by those people. If EPA told me those point-of-use filters would work, I would have a hard time believing it. They just create a problem. I think it would create a problem for the utility of having to maintain those things inside the home. And I really would encourage you to move away from that option. Thank you.
Anybody on the panel
Okay,
want to
I'll respond. And what I was referring to, it is technically a point-of-use treatment, but it's a pitcher filter. And you would have to, and in some cases with lead and copper violations, these have been distributed for violations. But what the rule is proposing is that in certain circumstances, and I'll let Mike speak after I am because he knows more about this, but typically during construction or when pipes have been moved, temporary local areas of the distribution system, is it necessary to do some additional remediation from potential lead concentrations in the water? And also being considered with that idea is advanced flushing, public education, consumer education. I think things we're all more comfortable with and more understandable. You tell people how to flush the line, and there's evolving science on what's most appropriate for doing that. But if you did have to deliver a pitcher to someone, and you'd also be probably responsible for maintaining it, the filter. My issue is, what does that do about the psychology of the consumer drinking the water, that now they have a pitcher? Is it ever going to be understandable that that pitcher is not needed or was only needed temporary, or what the value of it was? It just changes the dynamic fundamentally from my perspective.
I'll just say that point-of-use devices generally as a means of compliance with the drinking water regulation is something that is provided for in the Safe Drinking Water Act, the amendments of 1996. Our experience with them is that it is not a panacea, that they can work in some limited applications, typically very small systems, but it is a local decision as to whether or not to go that route, and it's typically an economic decision. So it's not mandated by EPA or states, but rather is an option that is provided by the Safe Drinking Water Act amendments if it works in a particular instance. But I certainly understand the commenter's concerns about them. I mean, there are instances and applications where they probably are not very appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I concur with, basically all the issues that have been raised here. I mean, I think Mike kind of pointed to it, that what you're seeing is an attempt to deal with temporary situations where people are actually doing distribution system changes or trying to deal with lead service lines and things like that, where an unintended consequence is increased levels of people's taps, and that's intended to be a temporary solution. But I would concur with everybody what has said. Point of use is something that we understand is very difficult to deal with from utilities. I'd encourage you to submit your comments to the proposal. So.
Thank you. Next question.
I'm just looking for some clarification. You mentioned carcinogenic VOCs. Is that the same thing as DPBs, HA5s, TTHMs?
Yes, it would be. I mean, the idea is this is part of the administrator's initiative to make implementation of rules a little bit easier. So you would combine the whole group, and that way you comply with the requirements of the whole group, all the carcinogenic VOCs. The idea being that it's reduces your monitoring somewhat, and even further, if you, for example, did have a CVOC problem, you put in a treatment, you have some reasonable assurance that down the line that treatment will deal with whatever comes up. So it would combine all those, it would combine a bunch of those groups. That would include the DBPs as well. In this case, we're talking about source water treatment, so it would be usually before they were formed, but that group would include the DBPs. Does that answer the question? Make sure I'm clear. Yeah, I mean, the DBPs we're dealing with usually are post-treatment. That's when you're dealing with them. So you've got to look more at precursor removal. The CVOCs, while they would include that group, are more focused on source water contamination and what you need to do to treat that, and how we reduce the monitoring burden and the compliance burden on folks to combine them as a group. It's an effort that we're still working on. It's not easy to put them all in a group, decide on one MCL for all of them. How do we approach it? I'd encourage you to listen to or pay attention to what's going on. Sooner or later, you'll see a proposal and some guidance, and maybe that'll help people look at it and offer their thoughts to us on how we move forward.
Next question.
Many small systems are paying down existing debt, and costly upgrades will be necessary to meet the Chesapeake Bay Initiative. Will there be financial help for those small systems?
I'll open that up for anybody on the panel.
Guaranteed. Will there be financial help for these communities? And I interpret the question to be who are under these compliance orders or have these compliance burdens. The answer is yes. The question is, will there be adequate funding to assist with compliance? And I don't foresee increased funding from the main federal sources, the USDA and the EPA, and then of course you have your state funding. But I do think one challenge is, or one effort is to ensure that the funding is actually used to get to that problem, the priority problem, which is going to be the ones who have the highest impact from compliance and the greatest need for public health. And I think that's our agenda, to try and do that.
I have a follow-up to that for the panel, is just how do you see that specific issue with funding trickling down to the local level, and whether it be at the state or local level, with those levels of government having to put in specific user fees or taxes to support upgrades for water, wastewater systems, et cetera? Do you see that as a thing of the future or becoming more and more common?
Yeah, well, I know the answers of the audience is the problem. It's what are you facing, and it's unique to each community. But the burden is only going to increase on the compliance burden, on the aging infrastructure burden, on the economic burden. And I do think as far as a national perspective, maybe the best you can do is assist with the education to the consumer of what the trend is in the country.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, I think federal and state sources of funding are probably plateaued about where they are. We'll be doing well, I think, to sort of maintain them where they are. It's hard to envision there being an infusion of a lot more funding at this point. So I think it is a sort of a local, state, federal partnership and equation that we're working under.
And understanding that funds aren't likely to increase means thinking about alternatives. And so one of the things that comes and goes, I think, with time, although it always stays at a level of importance, is source water protection. And I think of it as a way of dealing with some of the problems in a prevention perspective, or from a prevention perspective, so that we don't have to spend as much. And that's a long-term view, but I think we need to start trying to think about those, because it's hard to imagine that there's going to be more money and not less.
Good morning. I have a question on the revisions of the total coliform rule. My understanding is once that rule went to OMB, that it had been changed or additional requirements were added for maintenance and inspections of storage tanks. Could somebody comment on that?
There was a, once it did go to OMB, once it came out of OMB, there was a request for comments on whether there was a need for such a rule or such kinds of requirements for maintaining storage tanks. Based on the comments, I guess to answer your question, it is not part of the revised rule that says you must do something or you must have a program. There were comments, and what the agencies decided to do is to move forward with proposing some kind of requirement that would go through the same process. It would go out for public comment, be basically a separate rulemaking process that would look at whether we should have requirements, basic maintenance, flushing of tanks, specifically storage reservoirs. But I hopefully answer your question. It is not part of the revised rule. It's not a requirement of the revised rule.
Yeah, excellent question. And we asked the agency to, if they were going to look at proposing, and this would be could be a mandatory requirement for everybody on a certain level of inspection of storage tanks. And it is predicated on some pretty traumatic contamination that occurred in some storage tanks. That's where the idea came from. And the story is that this idea came subsequent to the agreement that was reached with EPA on the total coliform rule. And we asked that it be not done simultaneously with the total coliform rule, that it be done as its own separate rule with a public rulemaking process where everybody could comment and have a discussion on it. And I think I don't know if that's the way it has to come out of the OMB review, but that's the way I assume it is coming out of the OMB review, and I'm getting some affirmation too.
Next question.
Bob Earl from South Carolina, and a graduate of the School of There Are No Dumb Questions. I'm new to the industry. I would like the definition of a small water system.
The general, I'm not sure there's one. There are different. Unfortunately, there are different definitions in different parts of the world. Generally, small water system, for most of all our efforts, would be a system that serves less than 10,000 people. But that's not necessarily a statutory or regulatory definition.
There are provisions in the Safe Drinking Water Act that take that less than 10,000 and divide it into three subcategories. 25 to 500, 500 to 3,300, and 3,300 to 10,000. And there are different statutory provisions that flow from that. I think generally when we talk about small systems, sort of generically and in common practice, I think we're talking about probably less than 500 and maybe less than 100 for some of the tools and challenges that we talk about. But I graduated from the same school. There are no dumb questions. So.
Jim Mackey, New Jersey. My question is EPA or some of the agencies funding research on some of the MCLs that have already been established, in looking back as medicine and science has advanced, my town is now experiencing gross alpha radionuclide issues, and it appears that the science is from the 70s. And being that I had to get irradiated to get on the airplane with all the X-ray machines and such, although gross alpha may be a little different, is there any effort to see if we're keeping up, and that maybe some of the expectations of equivalent to feeding the rat 10,000 cans of soda to ban saccharin, that type of analogy, that maybe these thresholds might have been overly conservative, and with new science and new medicine techniques, particularly radioactive-wise, whether they should be revisited and possibly lowered?
There is a process that the agency undergoes called the 6-year review. So every 6 years, EPA looks at the existing drinking water standards and makes the determination based on the available information. So if there is a new risk assessment, it doesn't necessarily have to come from EPA. It could come from another federal agency or another place. But if there is a new risk assessment, or if there is new technology information or other information that would suggest that a rule should change, EPA will make a determination to revisit a rule. So it is possible, and it happens every 6 years for EPA to look at new information. I can't answer the question as to whether there is specific research going on a specific regulation. What we do is we ask our Office of Research and Development to study a number of different things, and on an ongoing basis they produce studies, but the risk assessments often take a fair amount of time to do, and I don't know if there's one on gross alpha.
I'm not aware of any studies being conducted on gross alpha or radioactive standards. But it's an interesting question, and with all sympathy, or trying to be sympathetic to EPA, sometimes they don't have the authorities to make decisions on policy because they're confined by a law. And this happens to be one of the cases. If there was compelling evidence that perhaps gross alpha wasn't as dangerous at the time they derived the standard, EPA is prohibited from adjusting the standard up in the Safe Drinking Water Act. It's called anti-backsliding, but they're only allowed to adjust down. And that, if that were something that needed to be changed, it would have to be a change in the law. And I think what you just expressed, Jim, is maybe there's an opportunity, or maybe it's a discussion to have with the lawmakers. And these particular group of contaminants are the ones that raise the most public opposition, and it's the naturally occurring contaminants. It's radium, uranium, arsenic. There's a family of them. They're naturally occurring, and often they're a real public issue when the exceedance over the MCL is hardly appreciable over the MCL, and it's difficult for the public to understand. A small adjustment of 1 part per billion is the difference between safe and unsafe. So it's an issue to be looked at.
I believe we have time for one more question from the audience.
I'm Willis Hill from South Carolina. On your SRF funds, are they restricted totally to public entities that can only issue general obligation or revenue bonds? And if so, why? Because we have a number of nonprofits across the country that, if it's held to that, do not qualify.
The law does not mandate prohibition on those systems receiving funds. It gives the discretion to the state. I think when the EPA turns the money over to the state, they say you can give it to, it's either every public water system or every community water system. And then the state has some, and also often the state has existing legislation on who the state's allowed to provide money to. So that would be, I don't know what state that was, but that would be an issue for your state.
Yeah, it is a state-by-state decision.
At this time, I'd like to open the microphones back up to our panel to make any closing remarks that any of them would like to add to the discussion. So I'll just go right down the line, and I'll start with Ann, or any remarks you'd like to close with today?
There are going to be some great source water protection sessions this afternoon and this morning. Please attend.
Jim?
I'll just say that kind of a very obvious observation. We live in challenging times for a whole variety of reasons. We have a very complex program in the National Drinking Water Program, and the way it looks in states and localities. It has a lot of moving parts, a lot of scientific, technical, and just human challenges. And so I think it's more important than ever that we work together, that we work in partnership. There's more than enough to do and not nearly enough resources to do it. So we just look forward to continuing to sort of sort through priorities and work together. So thank you for your efforts. They're much appreciated. I think the thing that is really encouraging to us as we look across sort of what is a little bit of a disappointing landscape sometimes is just the commitment of you guys and your colleagues, some of whom are not here, and the same in the States. We have folks that are extremely committed to protecting public health and to their mission, and that gives us hope and encouragement.
Mike Paik.
I'm sitting here with a panel of experts, and I'm thinking that Groundwater Protection Council is more of an ombudsman, if you want to think of it that way, and advocate for groundwater. And we do get involved in regulations that affect groundwater. But I am an expert in one way. I've had a meter in a rural water district in rural Oklahoma for almost 30 years, and I served on the board, the local rural water board, for a number of years. And I can tell you that without the National Rural Water Association and the state association, we couldn't have done our job. We did not have the resources or the capacity, and I'm talking about just technical capacity and knowledge to do things without that kind of assistance. So I learned very early in that process how valuable NRWA and the state associations are. I wanted to compliment my colleagues here and National Rural Water on the work we've done together for a number of years in source water protection. I don't think you can emphasize that enough, and we, along with Rural Water, ASTWA, and a few other associations, have really done a lot of good work in the last few years on source water protection and the source water collaborative that Rural Water and the other groups up here sit on, and we've done a lot of effective work. And I think that the success of that program in many ways is due to the National Rural Water Association and your state source water people who helped our people as boots on the ground. And there are relationships where the source water, state source water person and rural water person shared offices. And in those states where we had that kind of a relationship, the program just blossomed. And it's got some problems right now with money and funding, but that doesn't diminish the importance. And I think it's up to us as volunteers to keep that program going. It's the first line of defense for protecting all sources of water, but groundwater. Thank you all.
Mike Finn.
I thought I knew a lot about rural water when I came from the California Field Program. I've learned a lot more about National Rural Water in the past 3 years. You guys make a difference. You make it easier for those of us at the federal and state level that are regulators, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
And last but not least, Mike Keegan.
Thank you. An hour and a half and not one question on stage 2 disinfection byproducts rule. So it's going well. We have to take it. I have 2 closing comments. One to the audience. Please get involved in this process if you're interested. Through your state association, through the national association, you can contact the Washington office and get involved. And my closing comment is just to reiterate our appreciation for the partnerships with EPA and the state agencies. It's very important to us. I hope you see it as a positive relationship, and if there's anything we can do to strengthen it, please let us know.
I'd like to ask the audience to thank me or join me in thanking our panel, and I'm glad everybody's still awake. But thank you to our panel, and thank you for your participation today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.